Amen. So I invite you to open with me to Matthew chapter 5. Like I said, we are continuing this series on the Sermon on the Mount, and like I said, we're on the downhill run. We are towards the end of this, and so if you have been here, you've heard this series, you can probably do the intro for me now, right, as I say it. And like I said, we've been studying this, and we see again that Jesus gave this message to a large crowd of people that had gathered very quickly in his ministry. This is still at the very early stages of his public ministry, but yet he had already attracted a crowd. And because people were interested in what he was saying, and he was saying things that was different than a lot of the religious teachers of the time. And we see that in Matthew chapter 7 at the very end of this famous sermon that Jesus gives. It says that after Jesus had finished speaking, that the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he taught as one who had real authority, quite unlike the teachers of the religious law. And again, we see that people noticed that the things that Jesus was saying, the things that he was bringing out were different than what they were used to. Right? And we see in that Jesus does not always give us what we think we want or what we expect from God, but he does always give us what we need. Amen. Right? And again, we see that Jesus sees the bigger picture of our lives and about the things that are going on. Like I said, even when maybe we get what we don't expect, we need to trust that God is leading us towards whatever is around the corner that maybe we can't even see or know is coming. And so we see that, though, again, Jesus' focus in this sermon was to teach us what our inner life will look like if we decide to be a Jesus follower. Because the truth is, if we decide to follow Jesus and put our trust in him, and we find that saving knowledge of him, then our lives will be different. Right? And Jesus is describing that in this message. And again, he doesn't give us the way of salvation in this message. He doesn't give us just a list of do's and don'ts, like if you do these things, you're good. He goes all the way to the core of who we are. And he teaches on the most inner attitudes and in our lives, and that will then work their way out into our actions. And so now as we are through this, you see, we've studied all of these so far. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And then last week we studied, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God, which then brings us to today, which is blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Now, as we have this one, and then we have the very last one next week. And like I said, next week we will conclude this series. But as we jump into this one today and next week, these last 2 weeks are a little bit different. And you've probably noticed as we've worked through these that Jesus is building on top of the one before it. Right? And as we've been studying this, like I said, if we do the one, then the next one becomes possible. Okay, these last two, like I said, are different. Because the first 6 were about our inner life and about their things that, again, happen within our mind and our heart. They're things that could even actually be easily faked on the outside. Right? Sometimes, like I said, if you are pure in heart, it can look that way on the outside, but yet your inside could be very different. Even like so all the way back to the very beginning about being poor in spirit. Right? Again, you can play that part on the outside, but your inside could be very different. And these last 2 are ones that are very much on the outside of our lives. These last 2 are ones where if you are doing those first 6 in your own heart and in your own mind, and if you're truly living those out, then these last 2 just naturally happen. And these last 2 is where we start to see it come to the outside. Right? And even again, as we sang that song today, from the inside out, these last 2 are very public issues. Where the first 6 weren't, these last 2 are. And so we see this, again, Jesus has built all of these upon each other. And so then we see, now next week we'll definitely see all of them come to a culmination onto next week's Beatitude. So just as we see that, we're going to be jumping into this. Because, like I said, the public issues today is about being a peacemaker, and then next week is about being publicly mistreated. Right, like I said, and how we react to that, and again, very public things. As we look at this one, blessed are the peacemakers. Right, as we see this word peacemaker, when you read this, I had always thought, in growing up in church and reading, again, this famous passage, I had always thought that this one was about turning the other cheek. Right? And in fact, later in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus actually talks about turning the other cheek. And actually, we're going to look at that passage a little bit next week. But in further study, realize that turning the other cheek concept actually has nothing to do with being a peacemaker, according to what Jesus taught us. Okay, so as we jump into this, though, we think about is that this is not talking about not fighting back. Okay, and that's not what Jesus meant. Okay, as I've studied this, and again, you see the sermon as the whole, Jesus actually does not even address violence. Okay, and in fact, when you think about fighting, we think about peace. Opposite of that is fighting. We think about, violence. Again, Jesus was going a different direction. So let's see what Jesus really meant. Are we ready to jump into this? Because I know now I've kind of muddied the waters. Well, how about we clear them up? Let's do this. Okay, first, this word peacemakers. Hey, this is a word that Jesus uses. Again, the Bible was not originally written in English, and so just like in any translation, you can lose some connotations of words. Okay, so this word that Jesus uses that is translated peacemakers, okay, is in fact this is the only place in the entire Bible that this specific Greek word is used. Okay, and so when you realize that, we kind of look at that. Okay, well, what is it about this word, right? And in fact, Jesus combines 3 Greek words and kind of makes up this word that he uses that is translated peacemakers. Okay, now, so word number 1, the literal translation of the first word is to speak or to say or to command. Okay, so first of all, again, Jesus is not talking about anything physical. He's talking about words. Okay, he's talking about to speak, to say, or to command. Okay, now, word 2, okay, is saying to show or to make known one's thoughts. Okay, so we're not only just speaking, right? And he says, and again, there's a connotation of commanding when you speak, and you see that's a different kind of, again, body language and phrasing, right? If you're commanding something versus speaking it. And then Jesus says the set word 2 is to show or to make one's thoughts. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about my perspective. I'm talking about what I think. Right? And then word 3, he says, is a peace that brings forth prosperity. And so again, we're not talking just about keeping things peaceful, but yet a true peace that brings forth prosperity. Right? So which means that after whatever we're saying and our thoughts that we say, after we say it, it makes things better. Okay, it improves the situation. Okay, and so Jesus, like I said, mashes these 3 words together. Okay, and just saying, again, he's using words about the way that my perspective, right, and the way that I see things, and I'm communicating it for a specific purpose, and that is to bring forth prosperity, or to make a situation better. And so as we realize this, we see that really, again, Jesus is not talking about being beaten up or letting somebody beat you up, right? Jesus, he's not talking about being taken advantage of at all. The connotations of Jesus' made-up word are actually very forceful, right? He's saying that I don't do this through violence or through bullying, but Jesus is saying that there is a better way, right, to accomplish these things, right? And that's what Jesus is telling us to do. And so again, we think about peace, we think about fighting, and in fact, Jesus is telling us a little bit, even with our words, sometimes he says, you need to be a peacemaker. Okay, and a peacemaker is very different than a peacekeeper. Okay, a peacekeeper is one thing, a peacemaker is something very different. Right, and so as we realize that, again, Jesus mashes these all together to say, I need you to make peace. Yeah, and so when you realize, though, you think about, okay, so sometimes, again, when I share my opinion, I don't know about when you share yours, but sometimes my opinion is not very welcomed. Sometimes. Because if somebody doesn't agree with me on my opinion or my perspective, sometimes it can almost cause a fight if I share my opinion. And so as we realize that and to think about, we're thinking about, so do we fight or do we not fight? I mean, what is Jesus really saying here? Right, now, with that said, I want to just take a look, saying, so do I fight or do I not fight? Okay, first, we need to realize that fighting back is a selfish act. Okay, fighting back is a selfish act. Okay, finish this phrase for me. You need to learn to defend yourself. That's right? We all know that phrase. Right? You need to learn to defend yourself. Right? Again, what's the focus of that phrase? Me, right? Myself. Right? And again, when we think about that phrase, we're describing picking a fight, aren't we? Or finishing a fight, maybe. Right? But yet, fighting back is a selfish act. Hey, look at the just kind of words of wisdom of James. And like I said, James is one of my favorite books in the Bible because James just says it the way it is. Okay, and again, James, just like the Sermon on the Mount, is focused on people who are committed and following Christ. Right, already it is a message that is written to believers. Okay, and in James chapter 3, starting in verse 13, it says, "If you are wise and understand God's ways, then live a life of steady goodness so that only good deeds will pour forth. And if you don't brag about the good you do, then you will be truly wise. But if you are bitterly jealous and there is selfish ambition in your hearts, don't brag about being wise, because that is the worst kind of lie. For jealousy and selfishness are not God's kind of wisdom. Such things are earthly, unspiritual, and motivated by the devil." I wish he was a little more clear, don't you? Right? "For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every kind of evil. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and good deeds. It shows no partiality and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of goodness." Okay, now as we read this, and again, realize it is saying there's two kinds of wisdom, right, in this world. There is some that is focused on itself and on who you are and protecting yourself. And then there's another that is not, and it's focused on God, right? And so, which means if I'm choosing to not fight, if for the proper reasons, when we think about, again, if we're doing all of these Beatitudes, then our focus is on Christ, right, and our inner attitudes are all correct, then that means that not fighting back becomes a selfless act. Right, and saying, in fact, I'm putting God and other people before me by not fighting back. Right, I'm not defending myself. Right, in fact, I'm going to see God and I want God's wisdom, right, which is not self-seeking. And so when you think, again, not fighting back is a humbling thing, right? Especially when somebody is making fun of you or is poking at you or calling you out, your natural human reaction is to retaliate, right? And just to fire back, right? And especially if you're in a defensible position, right? Then our natural, reaction is to just fight right back. But yet, again, even if I am in a defensible position, then life is not about me anymore as a Christ follower. And I don't need to defend me. Right? And because the truth is that fighting back is God's job, not mine. Amen. Hey, fighting back is God's job, not mine. That's something that I don't have to take into my own hands. I don't have to take justice into my own hands. I can trust the sovereign God that I serve, that he will take justice. Hey, in fact, his word tells us that. In Romans 12, 17 through 21, it tells us this. It says, "Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Do things in such a way that everyone can see that you are honorable. Do your part to live in peace with everyone as much as possible. And dear friends, never avenge yourselves. Leave that to God. For it is written, I will take vengeance, I will repay those who deserve it, says the Lord. Instead, do what the scriptures say. If your enemies are hungry, then feed them. If they are thirsty, then give them something to drink, and they will be ashamed of what they have done to you. Don't let evil get the best of you, but conquer evil by doing good." Again, this is a very different attitude than the world, isn't it? Right, again, because our natural human fleshly desire is to just fight right back. Right, and yet, again, Jesus calls us to a different place. Right, he's saying if your attitudes in your inner life are in the right place, he says then you realize that not fighting back will actually strengthen your faith. Hey, because then where am I putting my faith? I'm putting my faith by not fighting back. I'm putting my faith into the God that I serve. Amen. Right, and saying, God, I am trusting you to make justice known. Right, I'm not going to take it into my own hands. Not fighting back doesn't mean that justice won't happen. It means that I don't have to do it myself. It means that I can trust the God that will. Because God is faithful to fulfill his promises. And he has told us that he will have justice. Like I said, God promised he will do it. Now, it might not look the way that we think justice should look all the time, right? But yet we can trust that God will do it. And so, as we think about, again, if we do our part, we trust that God will do his. Okay? And our part, again, is focusing in the right place, having our right attitudes and actions and heart in the right place. And so why does it have to be this way? Okay, why does it have to be this way? Because the truth is that fighting can be fun. Fighting can be entertaining. Okay, in fact, fighting in America is a $1 billion industry. Okay, and again, why do people pay for it? Why do people watch it? Because it's interesting. It's entertaining, right? As you think about that. So why is that? Now, there are epic battles in our culture, right? And we are surrounded by fights all the time. Okay, just one, Apple versus Android. Okay, just an epic battle. And I know, we can, one that we even have right here, right, Jeremy? Right? We can talk about this, right? Right? And I know I had to pick that picture, but that was fun because I have an iPhone, but that's okay. All right, so there's lots of epic battles. Another epic battle in our culture, right, is dogs versus cats, right? You think about, right? And, it's fun and entertaining, right? I mean, it can be. Right? And I wish I could just push play on that picture, because who knows what happens next, right? But you think, again, it's ingrained in who we are, right? We like to fight a lot of times, right? Especially with our siblings, okay? And sibling rivalry is alive and well, okay? And, it starts at the very youngest ages, right? As you see, you said, she's claiming victory right there, right? And that is not our children, by the way. It's not. It would have been funny if it was, but it's not. But see, the thing when you start fighting is that they always escalate, don't they? Right? When you start, it usually starts innocent. It starts as a fun prank. It starts whatever. And then, sometimes even sibling rivalry can be taken too far, right? To the point, sometimes, even it's way too far. That's right. It's photoshopped. Just calm down. That's a fake picture. It's all right. Right? But things can go too far, right? Just like that is obviously very disturbing. All right. Right? But when you think about why does it have to be that way? Why does God tell us, right, to not fight? Okay, but to be a peacemaker sometimes and to let God have justice. Okay, when we realize this, though, okay, because we get used to fighting and it becomes a comfort zone for us. Okay, because we are so used to it, like I said, we consume it, we watch it. It becomes a comfort zone, especially in relationships, right? And even when we talk about fighting, I think the most common fighting is in relationships. It's not physical fighting, right? It's in the war of words. It's in, talking behind people's back. It's in, saying this and then saying something else to somebody else and about just the drama that goes on in relationships, right? And it becomes addicting. It becomes then our new comfort zone. Right, and I think just like in relationships and within how we interact and how we kind of cause fights in that way, like I said, we see it a lot. And in fact, we get used to the turmoil and to the fact, like I said, that becomes our new comfort zone, and even to where we can even feel addicted to it. Like I said, if you work with anybody in recovery, and it doesn't matter what they're recovering from, whether it's alcoholism, whether it's poverty, whether it's drugs, whether it's anger, no matter what it is, you see when people start to truly recover and start to feel love or feel freedom, you see them sabotage themselves. Okay, and even, again, you can see somebody who's in drug recovery that has been, again, they're making great progress, right? They're clean for sometimes years, and then all of a sudden they just dive right back in. Right? A lot of times they do that because being clean is uncomfortable. Right? And so you see them sabotage themselves to go back to that comfort zone. Right? And that's why a lot of times in recovery, you make a bunch of steps forward and then you take a few back. Right? And then you hopefully take a whole bunch more forward and then you start to reacclimate to health. Right? To where that becomes a new comfort zone. But yet we do this all of the time in relationships, don't we? Yes. Right? We start to feel relationships heal. Right? We start to find real peace in that. And then all of a sudden, we just because you know the button to push, right? Or you know the thing to say. And we just sabotage that relationship all over again, right? Because truthfully, the core of this beatitude is evangelistic. Because if we can have real relationships, if we can live a true, healthy life, right, where we're not going around and just stirring up the drama, then our lives will be different.
Yes, amen.
Okay, and again, our interactions, even as a church, if we're a healthy church that are building up each other and we can leave the drama outside, right, our church will be different. Right? And the core of this beatitude of being a peacemaker is evangelistic. Right? All the way back to that core value we looked at several months ago or a couple months ago, right? Of saying that you have an answer when people ask. And if we think about, no, this is a place where people really care about each other and we just kind of work through things, right? We don't stir up the drama. People will be like, how can you live life that way? Because that's not normal. Right? It is different. And in fact, by God's wisdom, not worldly wisdom, people will wonder why it's different. Okay, in fact, in Matthew 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus addresses this when he says, "You've heard that the law of Moses says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. And in that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust too." Okay, Jesus tells us that things that are going to happen to you, okay, things are going to happen. In fact, the same things will happen to you that happen to non-believers. Right? He says the rain will fall on you, on the just and the unjust. Okay, but also good things happen to people that don't deserve it, right? The sunlight also shines on the just and the unjust alike. And he said, but what's different? The difference is how you react to it. Right? The difference is how you deal with it and how you handle it. Right? That's what will be different. Notice he said, then you will be true children of your Father in heaven. Right? That's one of the signs of being a Jesus follower, is that you act differently. Because God's family reacts differently to stuff. Right? When we get a diagnosis that we were afraid of, we seek God in prayer instead of worrying. Right? We act differently. We react differently. Right? That's the way that God's family does it. And it even says when we are mistreated, right? What do? It says to pray for them. Right? That's not the worldly reaction, is it? No, it's not. Because the truth is that just keeping peace is not the goal. Just keeping peace is not the goal. Keeping peace and making peace are two very different things. Okay, keeping peace and making peace are very different things. Keeping peace is about not rocking the boat, not rustling any feathers, not making waves, and all the other cheesy cliche lines that we like to repeat. Okay, but it has nothing to do with actually fixing any issues. Okay, keeping peace is not resolving anything. Right? Keeping peace means that we are just delaying the inevitable until we end up in the same fight again. Jesus is telling us to be peacemakers. And you know what? And sometimes the thing that we realize that, and as we go all the way back to Jesus' made-up word, we realize that sometimes it's saying what needs to be said, even if it's going to cause a fight. Right? But it's again, a fight with prosperity in mind. Right? It's saying, okay, let's see what we have here. Now let's work through it. Right? And let's work it out. And let's get to a lasting peace. Right? Instead of just keeping peace for the moment. It is longer range. It's a bigger picture perspective. Right? Than just keeping peace in the moment. Okay, notice in Romans 14, verses 9 through 21, it says this. It says, now let us try to do what makes peace and helps one another. Do not let the eating of food destroy the work of God, and all foods are all right to eat. But it is wrong to eat food that causes someone else to sin. It is better not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that will cause your brother or sister to sin. Okay, in fact, underline that phrase on your outline. Underline that phrase. It says, helps one another. Okay, our goal as Jesus followers is not to keep peace, but to help. To help a situation, to actually resolve. Okay, Paul understood that making peace in someone's life might take a sacrifice on my own life, right? And that's what he's saying. He's like, you know what? Maybe for me to not eat that meat, even though it's completely fine for me to do it, but if it will help you in your faith, then I won't do it. Okay, and again, we have to decide what those stands are going to be for us, right, in our lives. And again, I have a stand that we've made that, in our family is that we won't drink. Okay, again, if you do, I don't see any problem with that. But we're not going to because if somebody sees pastor with alcohol, in his cart at the store, it could cause them to sin. Right? And so, again, you have to decide and seek God on what are those lines going to be. Right? As I said, again, our home has always been a major center of our ministry. And that's one of the reasons we're so focused on this house getting done and we can have you all over, right? But again, come into my house. I don't want you to open the fridge and see alcohol because that could cause somebody else to sin, right? And so we've decided for that for us, right? And again, I don't know what yours needs to be, right? But that's a peacemaking step that we've committed to as a family, right? And so as we think about that, our desire is to help one another, right? That is our goal. That is our desire. Okay, and so again, even if it causes more tension in the moment, it's worth it if it will resolve something and if it will bring lasting peace. Again, just as Jesus says, to bring prosperity. Yes. Right? Which means that if we have issues with each other or something, even within our own church family, we just need to talk it out and we need to work it out. Yes. Right? And be peacemakers. Right? And as we see that, and we see, again, we say it, we show it, and we bring prosperity. And that's exactly what Jesus said. And blessed are the peacemakers. Yes. And so, again, why does it have to be this way? Why does God call us to this higher standard? Because every time that I have to do that, it reminds me every day that life is not about me. Yes. Right? And every time I have to decide to make peace versus keep it, or to make that sacrifice to help somebody else in their faith, then it reminds me, again, what my life is really for as a Jesus follower. And my life is not about me anymore. It's about God and his kingdom and about helping other people pursue him as they watch me pursue him. Yes. Right? And it's about making that every day. Because the truth is you have chances every day to be a peacemaker. And every day you're faced with situations and you have to choose, am I going to fight or am I going to let it go? And again, that's a part that we have to do as a Jesus follower, is just saying, if I'm working on all these other Beatitudes that Jesus is working on, and as I'm living these out, right, then I have to make that choice in every situation. Am I going to choose mercy, right? Or am I going to choose, to be humble in this situation? Am I going to choose, we can go down the list, right? Am I going to choose purity? Am I going to choose all these things that Jesus is telling us that we need to do? And we have that choice every day and in every situation and every interaction and every conversation and every time I go to comment something online and every time, whatever it is, right? I make that choice. And it's, again, this is a very public thing that Jesus is giving us. Because the truth is there are some fights that are worth fighting if it brings long prosperity. Okay? And if they ultimately help God and help others to know God, then it's better, like I said, I need to take that stand. But again, I'm accountable to God for that. Making true long-term peace is the goal, not short-term peace. Said short-term peace oftentimes mean I just avoid it until it comes up again. Right? And that's not making peace. That's keeping peace. Right? And Jesus is calling us to a different standard. In fact, this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible, Proverbs 26:11. As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. Again, the cycle continues. Right? I mean, as you think about that's a pretty powerful illustration. Right? And you think, again, we see ourselves and others do that all the time. We just keep returning to the same thing. Instead of truly resolving a situation, right? Instead of sitting down with a person and having that tension-filled conversation, we just go to the other side of the room, right? Or we just avoid them, right? And we just continue the cycle, right? And we just return. Like I said, sometimes you have to decide, and sometimes maybe just not engaging in the fight is you saying, I'm going to stop the cycle. Right? And again, we as Jesus followers have to seek him about when do I need to speak up and when do I need to not. Right? And take that wisdom from him. Because oftentimes just keeping peace means that nothing is ever actually resolved. Right? And we don't have anyone's interest in mind other than our own in those situations. Because I want to be comfortable in the moment instead of working through it and talking it out. Like I said, most fights we engage in are about ourselves. They're not about God. Right? And the fights that God is calling us to engage in are ones that are ultimately for his kingdom. Right? And that are going to be better. So as a Christian, I understand life's not about me. It's about God. And it's about helping other people know him. So if God has set us free from a situation, then don't return back to it. Right? And again, that's part of ending the cycle.